Over the past few days, I've had to really trim back. One of my favorite trees was basically infested with woolly aphids, probably in the region of 10,000 of them. And it got me thinking, this must have applications and analogies for life. Hi, I'm Ryan, and welcome to day 23 of the 30-day Speaking to Camera Challenge. Can't believe we're finally in the last stretch, or going into the last week now, which is very exciting. Looking forward to having a little bit more time on my hands and less in the way of filming and editing every single day. But enough about that. So, this bush is absolutely beautiful, covered in the most stunning pink flowers. Is one of my Indian Hawthorns. However, recently there was a huge outbreak of woolly aphids, creatures that are between 1 and 5 millimeters in length and covered in what looks like fur or just thousands of hairs. While they don't necessarily cause a huge amount of damage to the plant, they do spread and tend to cause damage to everything else. But this got me thinking about life and how, at times, there are no measures that we can take short of cutting something out entirely in order to move forward. With this in particular, I've tried poisons, I've tried everything else, I've gone and basically squished every bug I could find. But still, they persist. Then, about 2 weeks ago, it got the biggest haircut of its life, losing the majority of its leaves and probably coming very close to death. However, I decided to intervene in the process, hacked it apart, took everything down, and now we'll see the first signs of regrowth. Baby leaves and buds sticking out. Wonderful to watch something come back from the grips of death. In our life, I feel like quite often we have a lot of similarities to this. Quite often there are many things that don't necessarily harm us, but at the same time aren't good for us and tend to damage those around us. On occasions, we do need to cut these out and say, I want to be free of this. This often is a very, very difficult and painful process. It's something that we're giving up on every habit that we've developed around this topic. Whether this be smoking, whether this be drinking, whether this be certain people in your life that are somewhat toxic. And I think for most of us, we can relate, if not to the first two, then definitely on the latter. I feel like all of us have those people in our lives who are no good for us. Ones that we struggle to let go of. We look at who the person was, the memory of them, everything that we shared, and hope, unrealistically, for things to change, but knowing full well that they never will. For it's not possible for us to go and change someone else. It's one that they need to take that active decision themselves. They need to be able to move past those difficulties, those obstacles, those struggles, and decide who they want to be. They have to decide that they are better and bigger than those problems. Yet so often, we hold on to them and hope that things will get better. And here I'm not speaking about someone who's just going through a bit of a difficult time. We've all gone through that, and during those times, quite often, we're not the easiest people to deal with. Quite often in those moments, we are so fixated on our problems that we don't necessarily see other people's perspectives. We live with a one-track mind in those moments. And coming to terms with something else, or seeing the implications of what you're doing on everyone around you, is something that is beyond the scope of our perspectives at the time. However, these issues sometimes persist sometimes for months, for years, sometimes even for decades. And still, often we hold on. hold on to the hopes that things will just magically change, that the cancer will disappear. Sometimes it requires taking a knife, taking those secateurs and actively removing it, clipping off those branches that are no longer serving us, and finding ways to move forward, to move past it, to see what life can be like without this disease that seems to cling on to us indefinitely. And in the process, despite the difficulty associated with that, we too can grow and prosper thereafter, quite often living in a better state than before. However, it does also require that intense pain of letting go. And I think for so many of us, whether this is a person or not, sometimes for many of us this is a old relationship that we've had. I think for so many, if I look at myself in particular, there have been occasions in the past with people I've dated who took me years to get to a point of being able to let go and be free of the thought of them. Otherwise, you constantly continued to almost live with some form of unrealistic hope that somehow things would change. But we as humans do tend to be filled with that. It's almost that unrealistic optimism. Tend to be so dissociated from the world, seeing only what we want, almost quite often idealizing certain people around us. And I think quite often when we've let go of people or moved on from people, we can always look back and say, look at their best qualities. If I look at past relationships, or if I look more specifically at people in my life who have died, quite often we go and we idealize all those aspects of their life, all the great things about them, and we neglect everything that was bad. We put them up on a pedestal, make them out to be angelic. But in truth, that person never existed. That person was only born after their death, after the end of the relationship. And I think it's very important to actually go and realize that, to come to that point of understanding what we do in our own headspace. Because if we fail to do that, we create unrealistic expectations, not just for that person, but for everyone else in our life going forward, which creates a unrealistic expectation of the future, unrealistic expectations of them, things that they can possibly never achieve. We're looking out for that fraction of a percent of people that might be able to achieve it. We're looking at this checkbox or list of checkboxes that someone needs to achieve in order to be better than that or better than your past. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up there. But if you did make it this far, thanks so much for watching. Again, curious to get your perspectives on this. Is this something that you regularly do? Is it something that you are one of those people that can just let things go and move forward without constantly looking back at the past, and instead can just live in the moment, be present? But regardless, I hope you have an absolutely spectacular one, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers. So here we are. It's a little bit later. I am definitely having to squat down and go very low. But here you can see the first signs of growth. So this is kind of what I was referring to in terms of the pruning or cutting things back in order to allow for that later growth. As we're going up, this might be a little bit shaky. Don't have my gimbal on me. As we're going up, you can see the same towards the top, which is wonderful after weeks of the struggle.